On this episode, we're joined by Dan Salmons, who is the CEO of Coadjute. So today we're going to discuss their plans to transform the UK home buying process by utilising blockchain technology to connect the different parties together and create a real-time single source of truth about a transaction from initial inquiry all the way through to completion. So Dan, firstly, thank you for joining us today.
You're really welcome.
For those who aren't familiar with Coadjute as a company and as a product, can you give us a bit of background?
So Coadjute is a network for the property market. So what we're doing is, for the first time, we're connecting up all the estate agents, conveyancers, the mortgage brokers, banks, and so on, so that they can work together on a residential property deal and get it through quicker and easier and more securely for everyone.
Sounds good. Well, before we sort of dive into that in a bit more detail, can you tell us a bit about your personal background?
Yeah, I've been innovating for about 20 or 30 years, I think, in and around financial services. I've worked for several of the big banks. So I headed payment innovation for Barclays and rolled out contactless and introduced mobile payments to the UK and led a few other initiatives. And then I was head of strategy for Capital One for Europe. And then most recently, head of innovation for home buying at NatWest Bank. But in between those sort of big bank jobs, as it were, I've been doing mostly entrepreneurial stuff and leading fintech businesses. Ones like, again, mostly around payments, like Pay by Phone, for example, the world's biggest parking app, which we introduced to the Apple Watch when that launched, which was kind of exciting. So yeah, all sorts of things, mostly around payments. And it was a few years ago, I was looking across at the mortgage market and at property, and just seeing that it hadn't been through the innovation curve that payments had been through in the last sort of 15, 20 years, and looking at opportunities, and ended up doing some work at NatWest Bank and staying there. And it was whilst I was there, I actually came across Coadjute, who asked if I wanted to get involved in a pilot. It was the founders were just trying to demonstrate what blockchain could do. And I guess the pilot was successful because I ended up being so impressed I joined the company. And we've been on the journey ever since.
Sounds good. And I think anyone that's been involved in or bought a house in the UK will be sort of quite familiar that it's not always a smooth and easy process to get through to completion. Can you tell us a bit about how Coadjute are looking to solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult in the UK. It can take easily 6 months, often longer. It's actually a complicated and difficult process in most parts of the world, actually. And at heart, the challenge is that it is an inherently quite a complicated process, and you've got many different professions involved. You've got the estate agency, the legal side with conveyancers, you've got the mortgage and financial side, you have government agencies that you need to interconnect with, and so on. You need things like identity and so on. So it is a lot of parties that are involved, and unlike almost anything else where multiple parties are involved, the market has no infrastructure at all. And it's only when you point that out people realise that it's strange. But if you take for granted things like SWIFT that connects the banks, or CHAPS, or Visa or MasterCard, we take for granted that when you've got multiple parties that need to interconnect with each other, there's some kind of infrastructure they can use. And it simply doesn't exist in the property market. And that means that data and information is very difficult to come by, and you'll know that if you've bought or sold a house, you're busy phoning around to try and find out what's going on, and so is your estate agent, and very often so is your conveyancer. So it's hard to do that. And then when it comes to the movement of money, of course, it's even worse. It's it's a load of push payments organised by email and phone. It's far from an organised way to do settlement. And so our view is that complexity, that sort of poor supply chain, if you like, is contributing to at least half the length of time it takes to get a deal through. Things just get stuck and lost and repeated, and it's a frustration for everybody in the industry. I've yet to meet a professional who isn't frustrated by the process that they're having to solve for. Yes, and so what Coadjute does is, by connecting the parties from their existing systems, and that's a really important part of what we're doing. We're not asking people to use a new system, to follow a new process, to change how they work. What we're doing is enabling them to do what they do today very much easier, because they can see and interact with the other people in the property transaction in real time. And that's transformational, actually. It's a small thing, and it should feel effortless to them. But suddenly they're not all using standalone systems. They're now using connected systems. And the consumer also can be connected into the network and also see what's going on and interact with all the parties as if they're in the same place.
Okay.
So that's the concept at Coadjute.
Yes. I've got lots of questions about to break down some of the detail on that. Before we do,
sure.
Why do you think something like this hasn't been developed? It seems so obvious, doesn't it? Why has nothing like this come to the market before?
There have been a couple of attempts, actually. The Land Registry had a go, the Law Society had a go, both spent many millions, but on a centralised platform. And our view is that historically, by asking everyone to use the same system, you're asking them to do two things they really don't want to do. You're asking them to all adopt the same sort of process. And you're also asking them to share the data with a third party they may or may not trust. And just by way of analogy, if I went to any company and said, don't worry about using separate marketing, finance, HR and operations systems. Just here's a new system that will replace all of those. Just use mine. You can imagine the resistance. And that's why we have enterprise software that connects those systems. And this is even more so across a market. So yeah, I think historically the only way to try and crack this was through some centralized technology. And of course, with the advent of blockchain in 2010, and more importantly with private and enterprise blockchain, secure blockchain in 2016, now you've got a technology that says, no, keep your data where you are, work as you are, but you can now interact with the others. So I honestly think this is a great example of where it's just waited for the right technology. I think it was genuinely pretty much unsolvable before now.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I've been to financial services technology events for the last, I think from sort of 8 or even a lot longer ago, 10 years ago, the early sort of years of blockchain, and then there's been lots of talk and excitement, and particularly with financial services, around the potential use cases.
Yeah.
Why do you think, and I think it's fair also to say that commercial application hasn't really taken off on a large scale, blockchain technologies. If you think about the broad market, why do you think it hasn't taken off so far as a technology that much commercially?
I don't hold that view, interestingly enough, Mark.
I mean, I think if you think big picture in terms of a day-to-day user of financial services, how much of my transactions or my financial services operations are
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's certainly true that it's not widespread in use yet. I think it's moving very quickly, actually. So, I mean, I taught my first AI training course back in the early 90s. It was a long time before AI was a familiar part of the financial services environment. You know, APIs even in the early 2000s were considered crazy stuff. You know, even online retailing has taken, you know, it was available from the 90s and yet hasn't become widespread until well into the 2000s. So I think given it's only been around 12 years as a tech and only 6 years really for secure tech, I think it's moving quickly. So for example, all the banks of Italy settle every night over blockchain. You're seeing trade finance applications, capital markets applications. I think it's fair to say that every central bank in the world pretty much is looking at CDBCs. The big networks like Visa and MasterCard and Swift are all announced they're looking at it. So my sense is it is moving pretty quickly. Why don't we see it even sooner? And that's because the kind of applications it's going to be used for are the sort of market-wide, complex, multi-party type stuff. But I mean, I think it's pretty amazing that, you know, as we're sitting here speaking, there are estate agents and conveyancers in bits of the UK who are working over the Coadjute network, and they're working with blockchain live in the market. They may not particularly appreciate that it is. They may not even particularly care it is. All they know is they're connecting. But that is quite extraordinary. I often think, you know, maybe they go to a dinner party with someone like you and they say, actually, I'm using blockchain at work. And you go, no, you're not. And I go, no, I really am. It's so it is here. So my sense is it's moving quite quickly, and I think it'll be much more profound than most people in the market expect. And partly, I think people have been distracted by public blockchain, by things like Bitcoin, I think, which has caught a lot of headlines and gives the public a sense of it as being, you know, a bit of a crazy world. And meanwhile, the rather perhaps more stolid, secure capital markets grade blockchain quietly doing its work connecting the big financial institutions has perhaps taken less.
Well, that follows that classic kind of Gartner hype code, doesn't it, in terms of, you know, the excitement, and people will then write it off and forget about it, but in the background it's
happening.
Kind of yeah,
for sure.
Yes. I think also from what I saw, it's a technology we've been very interested in as well. We've done various proof of concepts, including one that we presented at the Building Sites Association 2018, which was a similar sort of idea, but a very basic sort of proof of concept. And it was just more to sort of talk through, if you could have that single source of truth for a transaction, what a game changer that could be for the mortgage world. And I think a lot of the events and a lot of the sort of early excitement, there was obviously probably aligned with that kind of Bitcoin boom and bust, etc. Sometimes there were projects where they were kind of also, a solution looking for a problem sometimes. And one of the reasons I was so excited to speak to you today was this intuitively feels like such a game-changing proposition in terms of whenever we speak to people in the mortgage market. That is the classic thing of connecting the various parties together. If you can make that work, that can demonstrably be a game changer. So if you think about then that the broad market of blockchains, you focused in on R3 Corda, right? As your technology.
Right.
Can you sort of elaborate on why and how you came to that?
Yeah, and it relates to what you said just now, Mark. Actually, that's really true. There's a bit of a joke about blockchain. There are more pilots than BA, and it's really true. It's very easy to stand up a pilot. And as you say, some of them are, this is a cool technology. Let's take a white sheet of paper and see what amazing thing we can do. We didn't come at it that way, actually. We came at it very much from, we've got a problem here. How do we solve it? And part of what it needed to solve for is we needed to verify every party. Absolutely. You need that sense of proven identity, which is why DLT is so good as opposed to public blockchain, which invariably hides that. So that proven identity. And then the ability for us to be able to ultra securely move data around. I mean, for what we're doing today, which is moving messages and progress updates, documents, that sort of thing, it's incredibly high level of security, sort of capital markets grade security, way in excess of anything else out there. But of course we will be moving money. So we wanted that from the start. So we needed sort of money grade connectivity. And then the final thing is really just the ability to be able to promise every party on the network that their data wasn't being washed around the system. It's not broadcast. And some of your viewers will know that unlike in public blockchain where it's broadcast to everyone, in something like R3 Corda, only the people involved in the transaction are connected into the blocks. And so there is no way they can see anyone else's activity. And in fact, they keep it on their own node. So we can literally say to people, we can't even see your data. I mean, we have no monetization strategy. We're not interested. We're a connector. And so to be able to say to people, we absolutely verify everyone on the network. We can guarantee a very high level of security, and we can make sure that your data is your own and we can't see it. That was the attraction of going for that sort of grade of blockchain.
Yes, makes sense. And obviously we've dived into some of the detail there. Before we do, for those that aren't sort of super familiar with blockchain as a technology, can you sort of paint a picture of a typical case and how it would interact with your network from initial kind of inquiry through to completion?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my head, I often say it's less interesting what blockchain is than what it can do. And what it's absolutely brilliant at is saying, if you've got data in lots of different places, and you don't want a center that everyone has to trust to manage that data, then this is a way that everyone can see everything they should do and work with it. And that's exactly what we've got in the property market. So a good example is you arrange your deal, you found your house, that's marvelous. Your estate agent will have a record for you and your house on their system. You want to appoint a conveyancer. Well, at that point, what normally happens is a completely separate interaction where you pass your data to the conveyancer. Perhaps the conveyancer's been recommended by the estate agent. That happens a lot. How do they get the data across to the conveyancer? They send an email or make a phone call. So it's this clunky movement of data. Whereas on Coadjute, what happens is they connect to the conveyancer over the network. And then they're now sharing data across the same transaction. And then we can also connect in a broker or a bank or whatever. And it's a bit like it. One way to think of it, it's a bit like WhatsApp. You can have multiple people connecting into what we call the deal. And the effect for them when they do is that on their regular screen, and that's really important, they're using their familiar software that they see every morning. And maybe they've got some cases that aren't connected over Coadjute. That would be normal. And when they do, they click that. They need to phone around, find out, email, do whatever they do. If there's one that's connected by Coadjute, they click it. And now they've got extra information. They've got information about what's going on at the conveyancer, what's going on with the broker. They can communicate through messages over their existing system. So it augments what they've got. And from next year, there's an app. So the customer can also be invited to join the deal and have the app, and can also see progress and communicate and share. And that's a small thing, but that's really transformational, because it means they're now dealing with each other in real time. And although it looks like a shared space, it always takes a bit of getting your head around. I always remind people it is fully decentralized. You're not actually looking at the conveyancer's database. You're looking at your own database, which has been synchronized over blockchain with the conveyancers. That's what's actually going on. But yeah, only the parties that are involved in that deal connecting together. And if they're not all in the deal, perhaps one of the conveyancers is not on a Coadjute enabled system, that's fine. You just do what you would normally do. You can see, you just have to phone him up when you want those details and email him as you would. So the whole system was designed to enable it to be rolled out in stages. You don't need everyone to get benefit.
Well, I can see the benefit of that, the app for the customer. I mean, I remember when one of the houses I bought, you'd ring up the lender and ask for an update, and then you'd ring your broker and the conveyancer, and they kind of tell you different things. So
they often, because they might not know. I mean, they literally may not be aware. Whereas on Coadjute, everyone can see in real time. So the chance of discrepancies, it's very easy to resolve discrepancies.
Okay. So how would that sort of happen in practice then? So you mentioned around I'm working maybe at a mortgage lender or estate agent or conveyancer. I'm using the same system I normally use. How would that work in practice? I'd assume you'd have to have a kind of critical mass of integrations for this to sort of really start to sort of take off for that network effect. Like, how does the integrations happen sort of practically?
Yeah, we one of our insights during the pilot phase, and we did a number of pilots, including the one that I was involved in on the other side at NatWest, is, it's right, there are 20,000 estate agents in the country and tens of thousands of conveyancers and brokers, and obviously a large number of banks as well. You don't want to, where you can, integrate individually. What you really want to do is integrate to the system they use. And we've signed up systems used by about 70% of estate agents and well over 50% of conveyancers, and in fact the systems used by the big ones. So we tend to integrate into the platforms they already use, and that's important for us, not just because it gives us reach, but because it means we're part of the software they use. So what you'll see is a little connected by Coadjute. You can see that you're now connected. And we work with, as partners, those platforms. So if you go, for example, you take one of the big ones like LexisNexis, they will promote that they now have Coadjute. It will actually be something that they promote to their end users. So that's how we generally do it. We generally integrate to the systems. And of course, some very large firms have their own. So we can integrate to those. But normally we're integrating into platforms.
That makes sense. I mean, we do a lot of stuff within the mortgage technology space, and I noticed you went to estate agents and conveyancers. How have you found because the mortgage market and technology is an interesting story. In terms of the kind of platforms out there and the general state of technology in that market. Have you got what integrations have you done with kind of core system providers or platforms in the mortgage space for brokers and for lenders?
We've not gone public yet on the activity in brokers, and by the way,
for a scoop today.
This is one of the challenges. I mean, one of the important things about Coadjute is we're independent and we have to be trusted by everyone. So yes, we're invariably under lots of NDAs where we have to make sure that we can't, I wish I could say everyone who's involved. But we started with estate agents, conveyancers quite advisedly, because actually that's who the mortgage industry wants connected. That's the beginning of the process. That allows, that's the information that's flowing. That's where the referrals are coming from. That's where a lot of the activity is that interests the lending part of the equation. We've got a sandbox for banks. So the first Most banks are now in the sandbox and testing and trialing. Banks will be the last. Brokers actually are coming very soon.
Okay.
So for brokers, they're very much part of the little triangle that the consumer deals with throughout the transaction. Banks tends to be at the beginning and end, whereas it's the mortgage broker very often who the customer is engaged with. But what that means for the banks is that they can then integrate that. And it's quite interesting. The bank's perception of Coadjute varies from bank to bank. So some of them see it as a customer experience opportunity, that it can give the customer, they can help them end to end. Some of them see it quite operationally, that it helps them deal with the conveyancer over, or a whole bunch of queries that are coming up during the course of it that they can resolve. And some of them, the real interest is the movement of money and the settlement, and that's really what engages them. So we're seeing different perspectives from different players. So generally with the sandbox, what we're doing is we're allowing them to play with that and try it and see the experience and then develop their own view of how they would use that in their own businesses.
So news to come on that, it sounds like.
Yeah, there will be, and there's a lot going on now in that space, actually. I think it will be... It is going to be quite well. It's a profound opportunity for banks. I mean, having worked for a couple, you have this dark period where you've kind of done the mortgage at the beginning, and then it goes completely dark for 3-6 months, whatever. You may not even know the transaction has ended. And that's crazy because you want to know when it's going to complete and you want to be involved. And suddenly what Coadjute does is shine a light on all of that. And suddenly now you can be interacting and seeing what's going on as a plethora of estate agents and conveyancers throughout the process.
Well, it's quite topical at the moment. I mean, we typically do see these kind of big peaks of demand and service levels kind of go down from and sort of inverse from that based on that. Still some fairly... manual processes, legacy systems, all that classic challenges of the mortgage sector that many will be familiar with. It'd be exciting to see sort of how that develops.
I also think it's an opportunity for the banks in that at the moment, everything has to be connected separately. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you're going to need to build an API or connect to an API. What Coadjute offers, because Coadjute is really a backbone for the property market, and we've talked mainly about the big players who are going to connect in, but all sorts of other things can connect in, like insurance and removals and broadband and identity services. Identity is quite exciting because no one wants to connect to 35 different identity providers, but if they're on the Coadjute network, they're accessible from your own one connection. So what we hope to provide is the rails for a lot of innovation. And at the moment, it's crazy. If you've got 100 people, they're all connecting to 99 others. That's the only way they can do it. No wonder it's not happening quicker. Whereas for any bank to connect into Coadjute, you've now got access to whatever's on the backbone, and every new player that joins, you've got no extra work to do. It's now on the backbone, and that's really what's been missing.
So do you think you'd ever get to the point, you mentioned like digital ID, and I mean that's again something it's been around for a couple of years, it's early stages, lots of different providers early on, and I guess we've seen a bit of movement from government and the Conveyancing Association around, okay, these are the trusted platforms, or at least the standards that we can adhere to, and then you can sort of have some confidence about the platforms that you choose. Do you ever think you'll get to the point where, because that's one of the frustrations, the classic frustrations, is having to give the same information
it's ridiculous.
to multiple parties, often in the post, or similar. Do you ever think you get to the point where there would be a secure, authenticated view of your digital ID that would then be passed between the different parties?
Absolutely. And what's lovely about the Coadjute backbone, it's a really neat solution for identity, because if you're on it, if your system is connected to it, and you're presented with a digital ID over Coadjute, when you check it, you're not checking whether the estate agent did it. You don't care really whether the estate agent did it. You're also connected to the identity provider. They're also on the network.
Got you. Right.
So you could draw down additional information over the network through Coadjute. So we think it's a great solution for identity because you just have multiple providers on, and whoever is providing you that detail, you can see from the estate agent that they've done it with XYZ. you can click it and you can send a message over the network to XYZ and bring back the details or whatever you need with verification. So yeah, it lends itself to, we call it sharing identity, but you're not really having to pass it from player to player because you're all connected to the source.
Yes.
And that's a huge opportunity.
Okay.
I think, I was looking separately identity in the past, and it was like, this is impossible unless there's a network.
Yes. Yeah.
And at last, we've got the network.
Yes.
So I think that's something I think will be, it might be the key. I think it's been what's holding up digital identity, actually. The fact that you've got, we want multiple providers, that's a healthy market. But the fact that it's so difficult if everyone's got to connect to all of them has been, I think, a barrier for it.
Yes, makes sense. So your kind of view is that cumulatively all of these incremental improvements of time and the different parties being able to see data more in real time, I think you said at the beginning, sort of roughly half of the transaction time you've kind of modelled out would be saved.
Yes, I think, and we think there's probably, some of that is directly from the improved, we've seen it in supply chain, haven't we, in manufacturing over the last 50, 60 years where, factories communicate better up and down the line, and we'll see the same. We've seen it already, actually. We're a little way off being able to prove it statistically, but we can see it already that you just end up with a better, more trusting relationship between the parties because they can see in real time what's going on. So it does change behaviour. And then we see there'll be a lot of, I think it's been a massive barrier to innovation, this. I think anyone with a great idea that would help the property market, help the mortgage process, today, the first thing they would need to do is connect to all the mortgage banks, connect to all the brokers, connect to all the players. And that's a huge barrier to innovation. And I know from my payments background, if I'm launching a payment innovation, I don't need to connect to all the banks and to all the retailers. I've got Visa and MasterCard. Now, if that existed in this space, then I think we'll see, loads of great ideas coming forward, available over the network that everyone can use at very low barrier. So I hope, that's my dream for Coadjute, that not just we bring innovation, but we open the door for lots of other people much smarter than us to do clever things for the property market.
Yes.
And ultimately move the money and do the settlement as well, which, again, is just one of those processes that's really clunky today.
Well, should we talk about that then? Because I think you read earlier this year that you were launching a stable coin. Is that right? Do you want to sort of elaborate?
Yeah, we've been prototyping the stablecoin concept for a while. It's one of the things we love about blockchain is because you tokenize things, you can put data and money and title ultimately in the same place. And we forget this actually in the mortgage industry. In the old days when it was all physical, you could bring a bag of money and your titles and your passport and sit in a room and exchange things, and you're all in the same environment. So and what we've done with digitization is we've atomized it. We've put the money on one set of rails, we've put title in a different place, we've put data in and identity in another. And so the way they're connected is laborious. It's admin. People sit down and literally with emails and things are checking. And blockchain gives you the opportunity to put it in the same place. And what that means in practice is that everybody involved in the transaction during the transaction can set up what they want to happen at completion, and they can see it. So our approach is that you don't have a generalized stable coin, you have a specific mortgage stable coin. So you have a representation of the money for this mortgage, this house, programmed so it can only be used for this house, which is super secure. And you set that up on the network, and you settle, there's lots of different payments actually. There can be 20, 30 payments going on. They're all set up on the network. The players can exchange them over the network, and then it could be settled on a moment and tidied up. The actual movement of money can take place later. But because the stable coins, what that means is that you can do an awful lot of netting off. You can do it instantly. You can do it with 100% reliability. So we've been trialing it, and we're now prototyping it. And we've got banks in the sandbox who'll now be testing it. I think we'll probably start with the movement of smaller sums of money. Probably not the mortgage on day one, but there's lots of other payments that go around, fees and things that we can do. So we'll start with those, which will be sort of embedded finance. It'll be something that, a user of one of those desktops would reasonably expect to be able to do. But it's a very elegant solution for the problem and the nice thing is we can trigger payments on traditional rails. We can trigger it on RTGS or anything else.
That was going to be my question, actually. So if you've got some form of smart contract or similar that has these events, it gets unlocked to make the payment. It's still relying on, you or another provider, or how does that kind of remove that key dependency on a counterparty? That the kind of the big idea of smart contracts, wasn't it, that you kind of decentralize it? I guess there's a limit to how much you could decentralize this in a commercial way. Yeah,
our view, our philosophy has, we often say we don't believe in disruptive innovation. I think one of the barriers, we talked about the barriers to blockchain early on, is there definitely are solutions that are incredibly white sheet of paper that sort of launch straight in with let's tokenize property and break it into pieces and sell them. And it's like, whoa, that's a hell of a leap. And I've never really been a believer that good innovation is disruptive. I think it disrupts over time, but you don't go in to disrupt. You want to go in with the lowest barrier to adoption possible and make it effortless and easy and a steady improvement. So we're starting with a view that we don't want to rush to payments. We want to connect people to do data and demonstrate that people are comfortable now sharing data and working with each other over the network, and then gradually introduce payments. And to begin with, I should think we'll trigger it through existing means. It'll always be the conveyancer, I think, whose job it is to say, yes, I'm good. That is the process we have in this country, and that works. But what they shouldn't have to do is all the admin that goes around that, all the risk of holding the money, risk of fraud, all of that. They should be able to trigger the payment safe in the knowledge that it's set up, and at that moment, the right thing will happen.
So it's kind of baby steps towards that and get people used to technology, and then I guess ultimately you could build upon that.
That's right, and take them through the stages, and sort of some people move faster than others, I'm sure, but we're setting it up in a way that there's no requirement for the whole market to whole scale move to something completely new overnight. That's I don't believe that's how it will happen.
Yes, that makes sense.
It'll be a more gradual process, but it is a huge improvement actually. When you look at how settlement looks when done over Coadjute, it's very elegant actually, and of course it allows you not just to do. Today there's all this nonsense on a Friday afternoon where you're waiting for your keys from the estate agent and they can't get hold of the conveyancer, and if it's not Friday afternoon, well, you're stuffed. That's it. Sorry, it won't happen over the weekend. Whereas on the blockchain, you can program it for any time, day or night. Everybody knows when it is. It can all be set up and fixed. And then you just know. You can go, you're good from 12. You get the ping on your phone at 12 and you're off to go. And that also can happen for chains, which is really exciting, because that means that you can back to back. At the moment, you're stretched out during Friday as each property. It's the movement of money today which tells you it's happened in a way. It's very sort of clunky to get through that process. Whereas actually with a blockchain method, you can, once one's gone, they can go like dominoes actually, and you can get through a chain very quickly. And of course, in the first instance, they won't all be on Coadjute. So you'll have a mix, but each thing that is done is that bit quicker. So it gradually improves the process. We are seeing one thing that's really interesting that we didn't necessarily expect so early, is even during our beta trials last year, people preferentially working with others on Coadjute. So it's not random. I often say that to people. People imagine, you just randomly pepper the country, but that isn't how it happens. We tend to build clusters. We tend to get people who want to deal with other people on Coadjute, and we put them together. So quite a high proportion of what they do is on Coadjute, and there'll be others. And we've got quite a long list of customers actually who want to go live on Coadjute, who we've said not yet, because you don't have enough partners to work with. So we won't put you live yet. It tends to go in clusters, and people will proactively choose others. In fact, literally just this last week, we had a case where someone was being a bit slow. They're coming onto Coadjute, they're just a bit slow, and a whole bunch of activity just being moved to another provider because they want that connected experience. And it's the early days, but I'm surprised to see it even at this point, if I'm honest. And I think we'll see a lot more of that.
But I think that kind of just, I guess, the market pressure based on speed and the
everyone wants it quicker.
Even when you think about mortgage lenders, so based on their service times, people will choose maybe even a slightly higher rate if they know that it's going to be turned around in the appropriate time. And from the conveyancing, I think that will make that there will be, because it's a fairly cottage industry in some respects, conveyancing, and it's very sort of disparate and atomised in some respects. And I think as you're starting to see some providers really invest in technology, that market pressure around people choosing them, because they just have to, when I was under a big deadline because I had school starting at a certain point, etc. I had to be there at a certain time. So I think that that kind of speed advantage, once it gets proven, the market forces will start to drive adoption.
And the certainty, actually, speed is definitely part of it. But we often say it's a bit like, when you're waiting for a bus or a tube and you can actually see the times, makes a massive difference to your stress levels.
Yes.
And in fact, how you plan things, like, am I going to be able to move school, whatever. So just that sight of where are we in the transaction with a high degree of certainty and knowing that it's real time being updated does have quite a big effect. It's funny, it's quite small. It's quite, you say, why is that? But it just is, the psychology of it is everybody is more comfortable if they can see what's going on. And nothing's been left because you can see what you're waiting for. And you can communicate if you want. So I think it does give a better experience, there's no doubt about it.
Well, it sounds exciting personally as a potentially consumer, but also MagiClick in terms of what we do working within the mortgage sector. Can you, you mentioned a beta sort of program that you've been working on. Can you talk a bit more about like the adoption? You also mentioned that, some cases are going through now. How wide is the adoption so far, and where are you with that? Yeah,
we're at the stage now where we're busy putting people live. Actually, it's turned from, like, last year it was very much we were doing a lot of signing. This year we're doing a lot of integrations.
Okay.
So we're flat out. We're putting big players live every few weeks, and many of those will have a rollout program where they start relatively small and then grow. We've got sight of truly national coverage actually as that rollout happens. So it's going in stages. People often keen for this to move quicker, which is great. We would love it to move quicker too, but it is it's a piece of national infrastructure, and I often remind people that this has to be done right. Everybody has to be super comfortable with it as we do it. So so we're in rollout phase actually, and so the volumes are going up, will be going up quite quickly actually now as people come on. And of course it's quite viral actually, because each person that comes on, then the first thing they normally do is introduce us to the people they deal with most and say, can you get these guys on as well?
Okay.
So that will happen. On the banking side, broking will come on quite soon actually. So we've got the first big broking partners coming on. Banks, I think we will sandbox for a bit longer. We've got quite a list of banks wanting to join the sandbox. So anyone watching who wants to join the Coadjute sandbox, that gives you effectively it's a production grade environment, but not integrated. And it's set up in a way where the bank themselves can play all the parts of the property transaction and see, almost play act the transaction and see how it works. Or they can invite parties they use. They work with a lot with one conveyancer or whatever, they can invite them to join. And experience what it means. Because like lots of these things, it makes you think again about your own processes and how you want to use it and where it fits. And if we've learnt one thing, it's definitely not one size fits all. Like I say, some banks will be particularly interested in one aspect and they'll want to develop that. So the sandbox is quite an easy way, for people to just try it out, find out how it works, and then we'll connect in the first players kind of as that settles.
And you mentioned there's a few integrations that sort of happened already. Any of our sort of viewers that are thinking about, okay, we might want to integrate with Coadjute, any sort of lessons learned from those first integrations or things you can share, some advice other than using the sandbox?
It is. It's been really interesting, actually. We've learned a lot. I mean, we're getting fast at integrations now. I think as you go through the first few, you learn every system is a little different, and then after a while, you kind of know. The main thing is ask your provider: are they doing Coadjute? Have they got it planned? Is it in their list? We've got slots, but people who haven't got slots yet will be further out. So I'd encourage people to ask about that. And I also think definitely if they've got a backlog of API integrations that they're thinking of doing, they should also, it's an unglamorous use of Coadjute, but they should also be thinking about, do I really need to do all of that, or do I just connect to the backbone and then get some of those connections done through Coadjute? So don't just think of it as a a customer service experience or an operational improvement or money movement. It can be thought of actually as just as a tech solution almost.
Interesting. Cool. So we're coming to the end of 2022. It sounds like you had a busy year or a couple of years.
It has been.
What are your plans for next year?
Yeah, next year's an exciting year. So obviously Rollout is going to be huge. That's a lot of it is just going to be ramping up the network next year. Consumer is big for us. So we're launching the app next year. It's in trials at the moment with consumers. So we're learning what people like and what they don't. And obviously it's a really important opportunity for the consumer doesn't understand it necessarily in as much depth, and nor should they have to. So what do we present to consumers to help them navigate the process and make it educational? Some people will want to white label that, for example. Some will just use our app. So we're exploring those possibilities. So consumer will be next year. And then the other aspect that's going to be big for us next year is we're already getting international interest.
Okay.
Because we're not the only property market in the world that has challenges like this. So I dare say we'll be exploring some of those next year as well. So I think we're leading the world here. I mean, it really is, it's really exciting. There's nothing quite like Coadjute anywhere in the world. This idea of this thin layer, this messaging layer to run behind existing systems. It's just not an approach that's been taken in property markets anywhere in the world, really. And so it's super exciting, and there's masses of interest actually. I think ours is in some ways the hardest market in the world. If we can crack this one, we can help the others a lot, I think.
Brilliant. Good. Well, it's been fascinating to hear, and look forward to seeing how it develops. And,
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much for audience for listening.